The morning air in London was crisp and fresh as hundreds of tourists made their way toward one of the most famous buildings in the world. Buckingham Palace stood tall and proud, its cream-colored walls gleaming in the early sunlight. The palace had been the home of British royalty for generations, and today, like every other day, people from all corners of the globe had come to see it with their own eyes. The scene was exactly what you would expect outside any major tourist attraction. Families with young children pointed excitedly at the grand building. Elderly couples held hands as they walked slowly along the sidewalks, taking in every detail of the magnificent architecture. Groups of friends laughed and took selfies, trying to get the perfect shot with the palace in the background. Tour guides held colorful umbrellas high in the air, speaking in different languages as they explained the history of the royal residence to their eager groups. Street vendors sold postcards, miniature palace replicas, and Union Jack flags to visitors who wanted to take home a piece of their London experience. The famous black iron gates of Buckingham Palace created a barrier between the public and the royal grounds. These gates had stood there for decades, allowing people to look in but keeping them at a safe distance. Behind the gates, the palace grounds stretched out like a perfectly manicured park, with green lawns so neat they looked like they had been cut with scissors. But the real attraction for most tourists was not the building itself. It was the guards. The Queen's Guard stood at their posts like living statues. These soldiers wore the traditional red tunics that had become famous around the world. Their tall black hats, made from real bearskin, added almost 2 feet to their height, making them look even more impressive and intimidating. The guards held their rifles with perfect precision, standing so still that some tourists wondered if they were actually real people or just very realistic mannequins. Children pressed their faces against the metal railings, trying to make the guards smile or blink. Parents told their kids stories about how these guards protected the royal family and how they were not allowed to move or speak while on duty. Some brave tourists even tried talking to the guards directly, asking questions or making jokes, but the soldiers remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead as if they had not heard anything at all. What most people did not realize was that these guards were not just for show. Yes, they looked impressive in their bright red uniforms, and yes, they were a major tourist attraction that brought millions of visitors to London every year. But underneath those ceremonial outfits were highly trained soldiers who had gone through months of intense military training. Each guard standing at their post had proven themselves worthy of this honor. They had completed basic military training, specialized combat courses, and rigorous physical fitness tests. They had learned how to handle weapons, how to respond to threats, and how to protect important people and places. The fact that they were now standing guard at Buckingham Palace meant they were among the best soldiers in the British Army. Their rifles were not props or fake weapons made for tourist photos. These were real military firearms, loaded and ready to be used if necessary. The guards had been trained extensively on how to use these weapons safely and effectively. They knew how to maintain them, how to clean them, and most importantly, how to use them to protect the palace and everyone inside it. The morning continued peacefully as more tourists arrived. The crowd grew larger as tour buses dropped off groups of visitors from hotels around the city. People spoke in dozens of different languages, creating a wonderful mix of sounds and accents that filled the air around the palace gates. Some tourists had been planning this visit for months or even years. They had saved money, booked flights, and arranged their entire London vacation around this moment. Others were locals who lived in the city, but had finally decided to visit one of their own country's most famous landmarks. There were honeymooners taking romantic photos, families creating memories that would last a lifetime, and solo travelers documenting their adventures. The atmosphere was happy and relaxed. Street performers played music nearby, adding to the festive mood. Police officers on bicycles rode slowly through the area, keeping an eye on things but mostly just enjoying the beautiful morning. Everything seemed perfectly normal and safe. Among all these innocent tourists and sightseers, however, was someone who did not belong. Mixed in with the crowd of families and vacation travelers was a man whose intentions were completely different from everyone else around him. This individual had not come to take photos or learn about royal history. He had not saved money for a vacation or traveled from another country to see one of London's most famous sights. Instead, he had come with a plan that would shock everyone present and create a moment of chaos that no one would ever forget. The man looked ordinary enough. He was dressed in casual clothes that helped him blend in with the other tourists. He carried no obvious signs that he was different from anyone else in the crowd. But while families posed for pictures and children pointed excitedly at the guards, this person was studying the scene with calculating eyes. He watched the guards carefully, noting their positions and their routines. He observed how they held their weapons and how they responded to the tourists around them. He looked at the layout of the area, the positions of the barriers, and the distance between himself and the nearest guard post. What he was planning was not just illegal, it was incredibly dangerous and foolish. But in his mind, he had convinced himself that he could pull off something that would make headlines around the world. He had no idea that he was about to learn a very hard lesson about the serious consequences of threatening royal security. The guards, meanwhile, remained focused on their duties. Even though they stood perfectly still and appeared to be ignoring everything around them, they were actually very aware of their surroundings. Their training had taught them to use their peripheral vision to watch for anything unusual or suspicious. They could hear conversations, notice sudden movements, and spot potential threats even while maintaining their statue-like poses. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and the number of tourists continued to grow. The scene remained peaceful and cheerful, with no hint of the drama that was about to unfold. Parents helped their children climb onto their shoulders for better views of the guards. Teenagers took countless selfies trying to capture the perfect shot. Elderly visitors sat on nearby benches, resting their feet while enjoying the spectacle. Tour guides continued their presentations, sharing fascinating facts about the palace and its history. They told stories about famous royal events that had taken place within those walls, about the traditions that had been passed down through generations, and about the important role that the Queen's Guard played in protecting the royal family. The guards themselves had been on duty for hours, but their training allowed them to remain alert and focused despite standing in one position for so long. They had learned to ignore distractions, to push through physical discomfort, and to maintain their discipline no matter what was happening around them. Security cameras positioned around the area recorded everything, as they did every day. Police officers stationed nearby kept watch over the crowds, looking for anything out of the ordinary. But despite all these security measures, no one had yet noticed the man who was preparing to do something that would test every system and every person responsible for keeping Buckingham Palace safe. The peaceful morning was about to be shattered by an act of incredible recklessness. The tourists taking photos and the children pointing at the guards had no idea that they were about to witness something that would make international news and remind the world that the Queen's Guard were not just ceremonial figures, but highly trained soldiers ready to defend their post at any cost. As the morning continued and the crowds grew larger, the stage was set for an incident that would demonstrate the serious consequences of underestimating the guards who protect one of the most important buildings in Britain. The calm before the storm was about to end, and what happened next would prove that some lines should never be crossed. What happened next would be talked about for years to come. In a single moment, the peaceful morning scene outside Buckingham Palace transformed into something completely unexpected and terrifying. Without any warning signs or obvious build-up, the man who had been quietly observing the guards suddenly made his move. The transformation from harmless tourist to dangerous threat happened so quickly that most people around him did not even realize what was occurring until it was already in progress. 1 second, he was standing among the crowd like any other visitor. The next second, he was running toward the palace gates with a determination that shocked everyone who saw him. The change was so sudden and dramatic that several tourists actually thought it might be part of some kind of performance or demonstration at first. But this was no show or tourist attraction. This was real, and it was happening right in front of hundreds of witnesses. The man moved with surprising speed and agility. He had clearly planned this moment carefully because he knew exactly where he was going and what he wanted to do. He pushed through the crowd of tourists, causing people to stumble and cry out in surprise as he forced his way toward the front of the gathering. Parents instinctively grabbed their children and pulled them closer. Elderly visitors stepped back in confusion, not understanding what was happening but sensing that something was very wrong. The happy chatter and laughter that had filled the air just moments before was suddenly replaced by gasps of shock and cries of alarm. The security barriers that separated the public from the palace grounds were designed to keep people at a safe distance. But they were not meant to stop someone who was truly determined to get past them. These barriers were more symbolic than anything else, serving as a clear visual reminder of where tourists were allowed to go and where they were not. But this man had no intention of respecting those boundaries. With what appeared to be practiced ease, he placed his hands on top of the metal barrier and vaulted over it in one smooth motion. The athletic move surprised many of the witnesses, who had not expected to see such physical capability from someone who had been blending in so quietly with the crowd just moments before. The sound of his feet hitting the ground on the other side of the barrier seemed to echo in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the area. For a brief moment, time seemed frozen as everyone tried to process what they had just witnessed. A tourist had just crossed a line that was never meant to be crossed, and no one knew what would happen next. The guards, however, knew exactly what was happening. Their training had prepared them for situations like this, even though such incidents were extremely rare. The moment the man crossed the barrier, every guard in the area became fully alert and ready to respond. The target of the intruder's attention was a guard who had been standing at his post for hours, maintaining the perfect stillness that had made him seem like a statue to the tourist taking photos nearby. This guard held his rifle in the traditional ceremonial position, with the weapon held upright and steady against his body. But this rifle was not just a ceremonial prop. It was a real military weapon, loaded and ready for use if the situation demanded it. The SA-80 assault rifle was a standard weapon used by British forces, capable of serious damage in the wrong hands. The fact that someone was now running directly toward it with obvious intent to grab it created an immediate and serious security threat. The guard could see the man approaching, but his training had taught him to remain calm and follow proper procedures even in emergency situations. He did not panic or make any sudden movements that might escalate the situation unnecessarily. Instead, he prepared himself to respond appropriately to whatever was about to happen. The distance between the intruder and the guard closed rapidly. The man's feet pounded against the historic cobblestones of the palace courtyard as he ran directly toward his target. His focus was entirely on the rifle, and it was clear that he intended to try to take it from the guard. What this foolish individual did not understand was that he was not just approaching a ceremonial figure in a fancy uniform. He was running toward a highly trained soldier who had spent years learning how to handle exactly this type of threat. The guard was ready for him. Tourists along the barrier began to realize that this was not some kind of performance or planned demonstration. This was a real security incident happening right before their eyes. Some people started to scream, while others stood frozen in shock, unable to believe what they were seeing. Cell phones and cameras came out as people instinctively began recording the unprecedented scene unfolding in front of them. Social media would soon be flooded with amateur videos of what was about to become one of the most dramatic security incidents in recent memory at Buckingham Palace. The man reached the guard and, without hesitation, extended his hands toward the rifle. This was the moment when his poorly thought-out plan would either succeed or fail completely. He had no idea that he was about to discover just how wrong he had been about the guards being helpless ceremonial figures. The second his fingers made contact with the weapon, everything changed. The guard, who had appeared motionless and unresponsive to everything around him, suddenly transformed into exactly what he actually was, a professional soldier responding to a direct threat. The training that every Queen's Guard received was about to be put to the test in the most public way possible. These soldiers had practiced for situations like this countless times, running through drills and scenarios that prepared them to respond quickly and effectively to any threat against their post or their weapon. The guard's reaction was immediate and decisive. Using movements that had been drilled into him through months of training, he executed a perfect defensive response. The ceremonial stillness disappeared in an instant, replaced by the smooth, controlled actions of a military professional doing his job. The would-be thief found himself facing something he had clearly not expected. Instead of the helpless target he had imagined, he was now dealing with a trained soldier who was prepared for exactly this type of confrontation. The tables had turned completely, and the hunter had suddenly become the hunted. The sound of the confrontation echoed across the courtyard, causing even more tourists to look up and realize that something serious was happening. The peaceful morning had been shattered, and what was unfolding now would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. Other guards in the area had also noticed the disturbance. The Queen's Guard worked as a team, and when one of their members was threatened, they all responded. The carefully choreographed system of palace security was now in full operation, with multiple trained professionals converging on the scene. The man who had started this incident was about to learn that his moment of madness would have consequences far beyond anything he had imagined. He had crossed a line that should never be crossed, and now he would face the full weight of the security measures that protected one of the most important buildings in Britain. The tourists watching from behind the barriers could hardly believe what they were seeing. Many of them had come to London expecting to see a peaceful changing of the guard ceremony, or to take some nice photos with the famous red-uniformed soldiers in the background. Instead, they were witnessing a real-life security incident that would make headlines around the world. The incident was unfolding so quickly that many people were still trying to understand what was happening. The transition from peaceful tourist scene to serious security threat had occurred in a matter of seconds, leaving everyone scrambling to catch up with the rapidly changing situation. What had started as one man's foolish decision to try to grab a guard's rifle had now become a test of every security measure and training protocol designed to protect Buckingham Palace. The guards were about to demonstrate exactly why they were chosen for this important duty, and why anyone who threatened them would face immediate and overwhelming consequences. The moment of madness had passed, and now it was time for the guards to show what they were really capable of when pushed to action. The transformation was incredible to watch. One moment, the guard had been standing perfectly still like a statue that tourists could photograph and admire. The next moment, he had become a highly trained soldier in action, responding to a direct threat with the kind of precision and speed that only comes from years of intensive military training. The change happened so fast that many of the tourists watching could barely follow what was occurring, but those who managed to keep up with the rapid sequence of events witnessed something truly remarkable. A perfect example of military training in action. The guard's response was not random or panicked. Every movement he made had been practiced hundreds of times during training exercises. His instructors had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, running him through drill after drill until his responses became automatic and instinctive. When the intruder's hands reached for the rifle, the guard immediately executed a defensive maneuver that had been drilled into him since his first day of training. Using the butt of his rifle as a defensive weapon, he struck back at the attacker with controlled force, aimed at stopping the threat without causing unnecessary harm. The strike was precise and effective. The guard had been trained to use exactly the right amount of force needed to neutralize a threat while maintaining control of the situation. This was not about revenge or anger. This was about professional military response to a security breach. The sound of the impact echoed across the courtyard, causing tourists to gasp and step back even further from the barriers. Many people had never seen military training in action before, and the speed and efficiency of the guard's response was both impressive and somewhat frightening to witness. But the individual guard's response was only the beginning. The Queen's Guard operated as a coordinated unit, and when one member of the team was threatened, the entire system swung into action with remarkable efficiency. Within seconds of the initial confrontation, additional guards began moving toward the scene from multiple directions. These soldiers had been stationed at various points around the palace grounds, maintaining their ceremonial posts while remaining alert for any signs of trouble. The sound of heavy military boots striking the ancient cobblestones filled the air as these reinforcements converged on the location of the incident. Each guard moved with purpose and determination, covering the ground between their posts and the emergency scene with impressive speed. What was particularly striking about their response was how organized and controlled it appeared. Despite the urgency of the situation, the guards did not simply run randomly toward the trouble spot. Instead, they moved in a coordinated pattern that had clearly been planned and practiced many times before. Some guards approached from the left side of the courtyard, while others came from the right. This created a tactical advantage by surrounding the threat from multiple angles, making it impossible for the intruder to escape or to predict where the next response would come from. The guards' training had taught them to work together as a team, with each member understanding their role in any emergency response. They communicated with each other using subtle signals and movements that tourists would not recognize but that conveyed important tactical information between the soldiers. As the additional guards reached the scene, they formed a protective perimeter around their colleague and the intruder. This served multiple purposes. It contained the threat, prevented the situation from spreading to other areas, and created a clear boundary between the incident and the crowds of tourists who were watching from behind the barriers. The coordination between the guards was remarkable to observe. These men had trained together, served together, and developed the kind of trust and understanding that only comes from shared military experience. Each guard knew exactly what the others would do in any given situation, allowing them to respond as a unified force rather than as individual soldiers. The would-be thief found himself completely overwhelmed by the speed and efficiency of the response. What he had probably imagined would be a simple grab-and-run scenario had turned into a situation where he was facing multiple highly trained soldiers who were working together to neutralize the threat he represented. The guards maintained their professional demeanor throughout the incident. Despite the adrenaline and tension of the moment, they remained calm and focused on their duty. Their training had taught them to control their emotions and respond to threats with clear thinking and decisive action. Meanwhile, the guard who had been initially targeted continued to maintain control of his weapon while dealing with the immediate threat. His training had taught him never to let go of his rifle under any circumstances, and even while defending himself, he kept a secure grip on the weapon that the intruder had tried to steal. This was crucial because losing control of a military weapon in a public area would have created an even more serious security situation. The guard's ability to defend himself while maintaining possession of his rifle demonstrated the high level of training and discipline that all Queen's Guards possessed. The tourists watching from behind the barriers were witnessing something that very few people ever get to see: professional soldiers responding to a real threat in real time. The efficiency and coordination of their response was both educational and impressive, showing exactly why these men had been chosen for the important duty of protecting Buckingham Palace. Cell phone cameras captured every moment of the incident, but the videos and photos could not fully convey the atmosphere of controlled intensity that surrounded the guards as they worked to contain the situation. The combination of their ceremonial uniforms and their serious military bearing created a striking visual that would be remembered by everyone present. As the guards worked to secure the scene, their training continued to guide every action they took. They had been taught to assess threats quickly, respond appropriately, and maintain control of the situation until additional help could arrive. Their response to this incident was a textbook example of these principles in action. The speed of their response had been truly remarkable. From the moment the intruder had made contact with the rifle to the point where he found himself surrounded by guards had taken less than 30 seconds. This demonstrated the level of readiness and alertness that the Queen's Guard maintained at all times, even while appearing to be motionless ceremonial figures. The guards also maintained constant awareness of the crowds of tourists who were watching the incident unfold. While their primary focus was on neutralizing the threat, they also had to ensure that their response did not create additional dangers for the innocent bystanders who were present. This required a delicate balance between decisive action against the threat and careful consideration for public safety. The guards' training had prepared them for exactly this type of complex situation, where they had to respond to a security breach while operating in full view of the public. The professional nature of their response was evident in every aspect of how they handled the situation. There was no unnecessary aggression, no loss of control, and no actions that went beyond what was required to neutralize the threat. This was military professionalism at its finest. As the initial phase of the incident reached its conclusion, it was clear that the Queen's Guard had responded exactly as they had been trained to do. The threat had been contained, the weapon had remained secure, and the situation was under control. But this was only the beginning of what would become a much larger response involving additional security personnel and law enforcement officers. The guards had done their job perfectly, but now other professionals would need to step in to handle the legal and administrative aspects of what had just occurred. The lightning-fast response of the Queen's Guard had demonstrated to everyone present exactly why these soldiers were trusted with the important responsibility of protecting one of Britain's most significant buildings. Their training, coordination, and professionalism had turned what could have been a serious security incident into a controlled situation that showcased the effectiveness of their preparation and dedication to their duty. The situation that had started with one foolish individual trying to grab a guard's rifle was now completely under the control of the Queen's Guard. The man who had thought he could simply run up and take a weapon from what he assumed was a helpless ceremonial figure had discovered just how wrong he had been about the capabilities of these highly trained soldiers. The guards worked together with the kind of seamless coordination that only comes from extensive training and shared experience. Each soldier knew exactly what his role was in containing the threat, and they executed their duties with the precision of a well-rehearsed military operation. The primary guard, who had been the initial target of the attack, maintained his grip on his rifle while continuing to defend his position. His training had taught him that under no circumstances should he allow his weapon to be taken, and despite the physical confrontation, he never lost control of the firearm that the intruder had tried to steal. The additional guards who had converged on the scene formed a tactical perimeter around the incident. Their positioning was not random. Each soldier had taken up a specific location that allowed them to control the situation while maintaining clear lines of communication with each other. Working together, the guards began the process of restraining the intruder. This was not done with unnecessary force or aggression, but rather with the controlled application of the minimum force required to neutralize the threat and secure the individual who had created the security breach. The man found himself completely overwhelmed by the professional response of the soldiers. What he had probably imagined would be a quick grab of an undefended weapon had instead turned into a situation where he was facing multiple trained professionals who were working together to subdue him safely and effectively. The guards used techniques they had learned during their military training to control and restrain the individual without causing unnecessary harm. Their goal was to end the threat, secure the area, and ensure that the situation did not escalate further. Within moments, the would-be thief found himself on the ground, with guards positioned to maintain control over his movements while ensuring his safety and the safety of everyone else in the area. The speed and efficiency with which this was accomplished demonstrated the high level of training that every Queen's Guard received. The takedown was executed with textbook precision. The guards had trained for scenarios exactly like this one, practicing the techniques and procedures needed to handle security threats in a public environment. Their response showed the value of this preparation and training. As the guards worked to secure the intruder, the atmosphere around the palace gates became increasingly chaotic. The tourists who had come for a peaceful morning of sightseeing suddenly found themselves witnessing a real security incident that was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The crowd's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Parents grabbed their children and pulled them away from the barriers, not knowing if the situation might escalate further or if additional threats might emerge. The protective instincts of mothers and fathers kicked in as they sought to get their families to safety. Elderly visitors, many of whom had mobility challenges, found themselves caught in a difficult situation. They wanted to move away from what appeared to be a dangerous incident, but they could not move as quickly as younger tourists. Some kind strangers helped them navigate through the increasingly crowded and confused mass of people. The sound level around the palace gates increased dramatically as people reacted to what they were witnessing. Screams of surprise and fear mixed with shouts of confusion as tourists tried to understand what was happening and what they should do in response. Many people instinctively reached for their cell phones and cameras, wanting to document this unprecedented event. Within seconds, dozens of amateur photographers and videographers were recording the incident from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive visual record of everything that was taking place. The footage being captured would soon find its way onto social media platforms around the world, where millions of people would watch the dramatic takedown and the professional response of the Queen's Guard. The incident was being documented in real time by scores of witnesses, ensuring that every detail would be preserved and analyzed. Some tourists tried to get closer to the action. Despite the obvious dangers of approaching an active security incident, the natural human curiosity about dramatic events drew some people forward, even though the smart thing to do would have been to move away from the potential danger. Others had the opposite reaction, immediately trying to leave the area as quickly as possible. These individuals did not want to be anywhere near what appeared to be a serious security situation, and they began pushing through the crowds in an attempt to reach safety. The mixture of people trying to get closer and people trying to get away created additional chaos around the palace gates. The crowd that had been peaceful and orderly just minutes before was now a mass of confused and frightened individuals, all reacting differently to the unexpected crisis. Tour guides found themselves in difficult positions, trying to keep track of their groups while also ensuring their safety. Many of these professional guides had never experienced anything like this during their careers, and they had to make quick decisions about how to protect the tourists in their care. Some guides immediately began moving their groups away from the palace gates, leading them to safer locations where they could wait for the situation to calm down. Others chose to stay in place, believing that moving through the chaotic crowds might be more dangerous than remaining where they were. The language barriers that existed among the international crowd of tourists made communication difficult during the crisis. People speaking different languages struggled to understand what others were saying, and the confusion added to the overall chaos of the situation. Street vendors who had been selling souvenirs and postcards to tourists quickly packed up their goods and moved to safer locations. These experienced sellers had developed good instincts about when situations were becoming dangerous, and they knew it was time to get out of the way. Meanwhile, the incident itself was nearing its conclusion. The guards had successfully restrained the intruder and secured the area, demonstrating that their training and professionalism were more than adequate to handle even this type of unexpected threat. The man who had started the entire incident was now lying face down on the historic cobblestones of Buckingham Palace, completely controlled by the soldiers who had responded to his foolish attempt to steal a military weapon. His brief moment of recklessness had resulted in his complete defeat at the hands of professionals who were far better prepared for this type of confrontation than he had imagined. The guards maintained their positions around the subdued intruder, ensuring that he could not make any additional attempts to cause trouble or escape from custody. Their formation created a secure perimeter that protected both the individual and the surrounding area from any further incidents. Throughout the entire takedown process, the guards had maintained their professional demeanor and discipline. Despite the adrenaline and tension of the situation, they had remained calm and focused on their duties, never allowing their emotions to override their training. The efficiency of their response had been remarkable to witness. From the initial contact with the rifle to the complete restraint of the threat had taken less than a minute, demonstrating the high level of readiness that the Queen's Guard maintained at all times. As the immediate physical confrontation came to an end, the guards began the process of transitioning from active response mode to security and containment mode. The threat had been neutralized, but now they needed to maintain control of the situation until additional help could arrive to take over the administrative and legal aspects of the incident. The sound of approaching sirens could now be heard in the distance, indicating that additional law enforcement personnel were on their way to the scene. The guards had done their job perfectly, and soon other professionals would arrive to handle the next phase of the response to this security breach. The chaos among the tourists was beginning to calm down slightly as people realized that the immediate danger had passed. The guards had demonstrated their capability to handle the threat, and it was becoming clear that the situation was under control. However, the impact of what had just occurred would continue to reverberate through the crowd for much longer. Everyone present had just witnessed something extraordinary, and the memory of this incident would stay with them for years to come. The wailing of police sirens grew louder as multiple law enforcement vehicles raced toward Buckingham Palace. The sound echoed off the buildings surrounding the area, creating an urgent atmosphere that matched the seriousness of what had just occurred. Within minutes of the initial incident, the scene was about to be transformed from a military response to a full police investigation. The first police officers to arrive were armed response units, specially trained officers who were equipped to handle serious security threats. These professionals had been alerted the moment the incident began, and they had dropped everything to rush to one of London's most important and sensitive locations. As the police vehicles pulled up to the palace gates, officers quickly exited and assessed the situation. They could immediately see that the Queen's Guard had everything under control, but protocol required them to take over the scene and begin their own investigation into what had happened. The transition from military control to police custody was handled smoothly and professionally. The guards who had responded to the threat briefed the arriving officers on exactly what had occurred, providing details about the incident and the current status of the individual who had been restrained. The man who had started this entire situation found himself being lifted from the cobblestones and placed in handcuffs by police officers. As he was led toward a police vehicle, the full weight of his actions was beginning to become clear, not just to him but to everyone who was watching. The charges he would face were serious and numerous. Attempting to steal military equipment was a major crime that carried significant penalties. Trespassing on royal property was another serious offense that the legal system took very seriously. Beyond these obvious charges, he would also face accusations related to threatening national security and creating a public disturbance. As the police officers led him away, photographers and video cameras captured every moment of his arrest. The images of him being placed in the back of a police car would soon be broadcast around the world, making him famous for all the wrong reasons. The incident had lasted less than 2 minutes from start to finish, but the consequences would affect his life for years to come. What had probably seemed like an exciting or rebellious idea in his mind had turned into a nightmare that would result in serious criminal charges, a permanent criminal record, and likely a significant prison sentence. The area around the palace gates remained busy with activity as police officers began the process of collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses. Crime scene tape was put up to preserve the location where the incident had occurred, and investigators began taking photographs and measurements of the scene. The tourists who had witnessed the event found themselves being approached by police officers who wanted to collect their accounts of what had happened. Many people were eager to share their experiences and to provide any video footage or photographs they had captured during the incident. These witness statements and amateur recordings would become crucial evidence in the case against the individual who had been arrested. The fact that the entire incident had been captured from multiple angles by dozens of different cameras meant that there would be no doubt about what had occurred or who was responsible. The international media quickly picked up on the story, and within hours, news reports about the incident were being broadcast around the world. Television news programs, newspaper websites, and social media platforms were all covering the dramatic events at Buckingham Palace. The footage of the Queen's Guard responding to the threat became viral almost immediately. Millions of people watched videos of the professional and efficient way the soldiers had handled the situation, gaining new appreciation for the training and capabilities of these ceremonial guards. Expert commentators began analyzing the incident on television and radio programs, praising the response of the guards and explaining to the public why their reaction had been so quick and effective. Military analysts pointed out the excellent training and discipline that had been demonstrated during the confrontation. Security experts used the incident as an example of how proper training and preparation could turn what might have been a serious security breach into a well-controlled situation. The guards had proven that they were much more than just tourist attractions in fancy uniforms. The incident also prompted immediate reviews of security protocols at Buckingham Palace and other royal residences. While the existing security measures had worked perfectly in this case, officials wanted to examine whether any improvements could be made to prevent similar incidents in the future. Additional security cameras were installed around the palace perimeter, and the number of plainclothes security officers in the tourist areas was increased. These changes were designed to provide even earlier warning of potential threats, and to give security personnel more options for responding to incidents. The Queen's Guard themselves received recognition for their professional handling of the situation. Military officials praised their quick thinking, excellent training, and disciplined response to an unexpected threat. The incident became a case study that would be used in training future guards. For the guard who had been directly targeted in the attack, the incident served as validation of all the training he had received. He had been tested in a real-world situation and had performed exactly as his instructors had taught him. His response had been textbook perfect, demonstrating that the military's training programs were highly effective. The other guards, who had responded to support their colleague, also received commendation for their quick response and professional coordination. Their ability to work together as a team had been crucial in containing the threat quickly and safely. The tourists who had witnessed the incident had experiences they would never forget. Many of them had come to London expecting to see traditional ceremonies and take photographs with the famous guards. Instead, they had witnessed a real security incident that gave them a completely new understanding of what these soldiers actually do. Some visitors said the experience had made them feel safer, knowing that such well-trained and capable people were protecting important locations. Others admitted that seeing the incident had been frightening, but they were impressed by how quickly and professionally it had been handled. The amateur videos and photographs taken by tourists became valuable historical records of the incident. These images were shared millions of times on social media platforms, giving people around the world a first-hand view of how the Queen's Guard responds to real threats. Educational institutions began using the incident as a teaching tool, showing students examples of effective security response and military training in action. The incident demonstrated important principles about preparation, teamwork, and professional discipline under pressure. The man who had caused the entire situation faced a very different future than he had probably imagined when he decided to try to grab a guard's rifle. Court proceedings would take months to complete, and he would likely spend a significant amount of time in prison as a result of his actions. His case became a clear example of why threatening royal security was taken so seriously by the legal system. The courts would send a strong message that such behavior would not be tolerated and would be punished to the full extent of the law. The incident also highlighted the important role that the Queen's Guard plays in protecting British heritage and royal traditions. These soldiers are not just ceremonial figures, but are active guardians of some of the country's most important institutions and locations. For the Queen's Guard organization, the incident became a source of pride and validation. They had proven that their training programs, selection processes, and operational procedures were effective, and that their guards could handle real threats while maintaining the dignity and traditions of their historic role. The reputation of the Queen's Guard, which had been built over centuries of faithful service, was enhanced by their professional response to this modern threat. They had shown that they could adapt their traditional role to meet contemporary security challenges without losing any of their historical significance. As the immediate aftermath of the incident settled down and normal operations resumed around Buckingham Palace, the lessons learned from the event continued to influence security planning and training programs. The incident had provided valuable real-world experience that would help prepare future guards for similar situations. The man who had made the foolish decision to threaten royal security had learned a hard lesson about the serious consequences of his actions. His brief moment of recklessness had resulted in international embarrassment, serious criminal charges, and a permanent reminder that some lines should never be crossed. The Queen's Guard had once again proven why they are trusted with the important responsibility of protecting Britain's royal heritage, demonstrating that beneath their ceremonial uniforms are highly trained soldiers, ready to defend their posts against any threat.